In August 2013, 20-year-old Renee Marsden left her family home in Sydney, believing her life had just fallen apart. By the end of the night, she was gone. What her parents would later uncover was not simply the story of a young woman who died by suicide, but a disturbing case of psychological manipulation, digital deception, and a legal system unprepared for the kind of harm that unfolded entirely through screens. Renee was described by those who loved her as kind, loyal, and deeply invested in the people she cared about. Like many young adults, her world was closely tied to her phone. Messages, social media, and online conversations were not a distraction from real life. They were an extension of it. Over time, that digital world became dominated by one person she believed was her boyfriend, a man named Braden Spiteri. According to the story Renee was told, Braden was serving a prison sentence for manslaughter after a motorcycle accident. Because of his incarceration, their relationship existed almost entirely through text messages and online communication. They never met in person, never spoke on the phone, and never spent time together face-to-face. Yet emotionally, Braden occupied the center of Renee's life. The narrative surrounding Braden was detailed and convincing. He was presented as someone who had suffered greatly, who needed Renee, and who promised her a future together once he was released. There were explanations for every gap, every doubt, every question. Calls were impossible because of prison rules. Visits could not happen due to legal complications. Messages had to be secretive. Over time, these restrictions did not weaken the bond. They intensified it. Renee's loyalty deepened, and her emotional dependence grew. On the day Renee died, her mother Teresa sensed something was wrong almost immediately. Renee returned home from work, unusually quiet and withdrawn. Shortly afterward, Teresa received a text message from Braden, warning that Renee had threatened to harm herself. It was an alarming message, and it revealed something critical that would later be examined in detail. Whoever was behind Braden understood Renee's emotional state and the seriousness of the situation. Renee later left the house, telling her mother she was going out. Before she did, she sent a final message filled with love and apology. When she failed to return home, police were contacted. Her car was eventually located near the Gap at Watson's Bay, one of Sydney's most notorious suicide locations. Renee's body was never recovered. She was 20 years old. In the weeks that followed, Renee's parents tried to understand what had happened. They focused on Braden, the boyfriend who had ended the relationship that same day. They attempted to contact him, but received no meaningful response. They also turned to Renee's close friend, Camila Zayden, who appeared to know more about Braden than anyone else. Camila had been part of Renee's life for years and was someone the family trusted. Yet her behavior after Renee's death raised quiet concerns. She seemed less focused on grieving her friend and more concerned about protecting Braden from blame. As time passed, small inconsistencies began to surface. Stories did not quite align. Details changed. Camila appeared unusually anxious about police inquiries involving Braden. Still, nothing concrete emerged until the focus shifted to Renee's phone. The investigation was immediately hindered by a problem that would later prove devastating: time. In 2013, mobile carriers retained message data for only a short period unless police specifically requested preservation. By the time Renee's family sought access to her records, much of the data had already vanished. The phone Renee used closest to her death was never recovered. Police seized devices from Camila, but thousands of messages had already been deleted. Most critically, the messages exchanged on the day Renee died, including the final series of communications with Braden, were gone. Years later, advances in technology allowed investigators to recover portions of Renee's earlier message history from a different device. What emerged was deeply unsettling. Over months, Renee had exchanged thousands of messages with Braden and with Camila. When those messages were analyzed side by side, a pattern appeared. Communication from Braden and communication from Camilla rarely overlapped. When one stopped, the other began. It looked less like three people interacting and more like a single operator switching identities. Eventually, police and the coroner reached the same conclusion. Braden Spiteri did not exist. He had been entirely fabricated by Camilla Zaydan using multiple phones, accounts, and a stolen photograph of an unrelated man. For more than a year, Camilla had been controlling Renee's emotional life through this invented persona, reinforcing dependence, creating conflict, and isolating her from others. The coroner would later describe Camilla as the sole architect of an extraordinary deception. The coronial inquest, concluded in 2020, examined the case in detail. Camilla gave evidence under legal protections that prevented her testimony from being used against her in criminal proceedings. During the inquest, she claimed that Braden had been created jointly by herself and Renee to conceal a relationship between them. The coroner rejected this account outright. Recovered messages showed Renee behaving as someone who genuinely believed Braden was real. She discussed marriage, future plans, and a life that did not include Camilla. The suggestion that Renee was a co-conspirator was found to be false. The coroner's findings were scathing in their assessment of Camilla's conduct and credibility. However, despite acknowledging that Camilla's deception played a central role in Renee's death, the legal outcome stopped there. No criminal charges were laid. This is where the case becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a systemic one. Under New South Wales law at the time, there was no specific offense that captured this kind of behavior. Catfishing itself was not illegal unless it involved financial gain. Stalking, intimidation, or using a carriage service to harass required evidence that met strict legal thresholds. Most importantly, offenses relating to encouraging suicide required proof that someone explicitly urged another person to harm themselves. The most crucial evidence that might have clarified this question, the final messages sent to Renee on the day she died, no longer existed. Without them, police could not meet the burden of proof required for prosecution. The law was not designed to deal with psychological domination carried out through thousands of messages over many months, especially when the final push could not be reconstructed word for word. For Renee's family, this outcome felt like a profound failure. The person responsible for creating the fake boyfriend, manipulating their daughter, and maintaining control over her emotional life faced no criminal consequences. The harm was acknowledged, but accountability remained out of reach. In the aftermath, Renee's parents began campaigning for legal reform. They argued that catfishing should be recognized as a serious offense when it is used to exert control, cause psychological harm, or place someone at risk. The coroner supported aspects of this view, pointing to emerging discussions around coercive control and non-physical abuse. She noted that Renee's case illustrated how devastating such behavior could be, even without physical violence or financial exploitation. The case has since become a reference point in debates about digital abuse, coercive control, and the limits of existing criminal law. It exposed how quickly digital evidence can disappear, how vulnerable people can be manipulated through constant communication, and how legal systems built for earlier forms of harm can struggle to respond to new ones. Renee never knew she was being deceived. She died believing the person who had just ended her relationship was real. The coroner concluded that Camilla's actions created a false reality that Renee lived inside, one that gradually narrowed her emotional world until it collapsed. For Renee's family, the grief has never been separated from the knowledge that what happened to their daughter fell through the cracks of the law. Their hope has been that telling her story might prevent the same kind of harm from happening to someone else. In a world where relationships increasingly begin and exist online, Renee Marsden's case stands as a stark reminder that psychological control does not need physical proximity to be devastating. and that justice systems must evolve as quickly as the technologies people use to hurt one another. The lesson. Renee Marsden's story shows that abuse doesn't need violence to destroy a life. Control can be built through messages, lies, and emotional dependence until someone's reality is no longer their own. This case is a warning that psychological manipulation is real harm, and when the law lags behind technology, justice can fail. The lesson is clear: manipulation thrives in silence, and recognizing it early can save lives. If videos like Renee Marsden's matter to you, don't look away. These are the cases that expose where systems fail and why awareness matters. For more real investigations and stories that demand attention, like and subscribe.